This almond butter crunch is an old family recipe, and it's one of those recipes that I just can't go through Christmas without it. Not only is it delicious with that classic almond toffee crunch, but it is the easiest candy recipe I've ever made. It is such a beautiful day out. The sun is streaming through my kitchen window. The light is going to be very hot and very shadowed today, just because I need the sun in this beautiful winter solstice day, and I need it on me. So hopefully you guys will enjoy the streaming sun. It does kind of blow out my sensor a little bit, but this is for all of our benefits. Happy winter solstice. Now, earlier this week I put out a video asking for subscribers to submit recipe requests, one last recipe before Christmas that you'd like to see me make. So this recipe is for my friend and subscriber Stephanie News from Texas, and she sent me an Instagram private message this morning saying, "Help, I made almond toffee and it crystallized. What did I do wrong?" So crystallization is sugar's natural tendency, and so as bakers we have to do a few little simple tricks to keep sugar from crystallizing, and I'll leave those tips at the end of this video, so stick around for any of you who have ever made anything that's gotten granular and didn't quite have the texture that you wanted. There's a few simple tricks that will keep your sugar from misbehaving. What I love most about this recipe is you put everything into a pot, put it over medium heat. I put a lid on it for the first few minutes just to get that butter all nice and melted. Give it a few swirls, bring it up to a boil 5 or 6 minutes, spread it out, and you are done. You have the option of covering it with chocolate, and my preference is walnuts, but that is totally up to you. The beauty of this recipe is that it's not only simple, you don't need any special candy making equipment to do it. All you really need is a medium saucepan and a sharp knife. And if you're not adding chocolate or nuts onto the top, you don't even need a sharp knife. You do need a solid surface to pour it out, and I like to use a sheet tray, and I will line it with parchment paper, and I'll just give the parchment paper a quick rub with butter just to ensure nothing sticks. This is a really straightforward toffee recipe, and what we're going to need is almonds, butter, and sugar. And now the secret ingredient is often corn syrup, but since I don't use corn syrup, I make my own invert sugar, and I'll put the recipe below on how you make invert sugar. And it's just a tablespoon, but it's just enough to minimize some of those crazy qualities of the sugar that tend to make it crystallize. Just the simplicity of this recipe makes it so worthwhile. So we're just going to put our sugar, our butter, and our invert sugar. And 2 tablespoons of our invert sugar, which I don't even really need to, I don't need to measure it too precisely. Now, for those of you that don't want to make invert sugar, you can also buy it. It's called Lyle's Golden Syrup. All of you Brits know about it, but it's not an ingredient that Americans cook with very often. But it works deliciously in caramel and toffee because it has that natural kind of toffee treacly flavor. We're going to bring this up to a boil over medium heat, and I'm going to stir it just for the first little bit and get some of that sugar dissolved, and then I'm going to not touch it. We're going to bring it up to a boil and boil it for 5 or 6 minutes. And what we're looking for, it's not a specific temperature, it's a color. And you might have to make it a couple times and just practice. Now, given this is a double recipe, so the original recipe is half of what I'm going to put below this video. So just know that you can make a half recipe easily. So what you're looking for is a color, and I'll show you, it's a light kind of blondie color. If the almonds start to darken, that's pretty much it. because you don't want to overcook your almonds. These are your little indicators of perfection. So we'll put this on our heat. While that's doing its thing, let's go ahead and chop our walnuts. I really love walnuts. It's interesting that flavors can be so indicative of a place, and since I live in Oregon, we grow walnuts and we also grow hazelnuts, and so they're two of my favorites. Or you can try pecans. I know you Southerners, that you feel the same way about pecans that I feel about walnuts. If you have a really big knife, it's definitely the best tool. You have to, you don't have to chase them around so much. My butter is all melted and the sugar's starting to dissolve. A few of the nuts that have been on the bottom are just starting to brown. This is the point where I'll put the lid on the pan, let everything kind of condense and wash the sides down, and then we'll continue to boil and we'll start our timer right then. I'm going to keep a close eye on my candy because I don't want the nuts that are on the bottom of the pan to brown and get a lot darker than the rest of them, because eventually we're going to boil it for quite a while, so they're all going to get dark, and I don't want those few over toasted nuts in there spoiling it. So I'm going to start opening and chopping up my chocolate. Now you can use chocolate chips for this. I do often. But I decided to make it a little extra special today and go for some really good, delicious dark Oregon chocolate. I'm taking the toffee and some fudge and some cookies over to Mr. and Mrs. Wrangler Star's house tomorrow night for a little party. And always bring a candy cookie platter at the holidays. I'm going to show you what this looks like. There's, can you see it? It's separating a little bit, but it's getting thick around the edge, kind of thick and foamy. There you go. See it? And that's exactly what you're after. So when I do the chocolate, you don't need to chop it super fine. I chop it like a little bit smaller than a chocolate chip in pieces. And once we pour the hot toffee in our pan, you just take the chocolate bits and you put them right on top. The color's not quite there, but those little almonds are just starting to get nice and toasty. And I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. I didn't set my timer because I've made it so many times. I just go off of the color. The thing that you want to be the most careful of is if you get nervous and you pull it too soon, you won't have that texture. It will be soft. And that's a shame because it's not really great when it's not that crunchy, delicious toffee texture. But you don't want it burnt either. But I tend to err towards the darker rather than lighter just because you want your toffee to be crisp. This is the color that you're after. The nuts have just started to toast and it's a really nice kind of golden caramel color. Go ahead and pour it into your prepared pan and do it quickly. The candy sets up really fast. Immediately sprinkle your chocolate over the hot caramel and let it sit for maybe 4 minutes. When everything looks nice and shiny and the chocolate has all started to melt like this, you can go ahead and just take your scraper and thin it out and make sure that you get every single little piece of caramel covered with that chocolate. Now the walnuts want to fall off when you eat the candy, and so it's a fine line from pushing them around. You can't push them around too much on this because it will upend your chocolate and it will take away from the really pretty kind of finish look that the nuts provide. So you can scoot them a little bit, but I like to just kind of press them into that chocolate, and so it makes it less messy cutting and serving and also eating. Now I'm going to take this out and put it inside my barbecue. It's super cold outside, and that will just help it to set. You can also store it in your refrigerator if you have room. But that's it. It's one of the easiest, most straightforward candies because you don't need a candy thermometer. You really don't need any special equipment. A knife for chopping and a pan for cooking. So there you go, Stephanie. Thank you so much for reaching out and asking for help. Your 411 on how to keep your toffee from crystallizing. A few candy making tips that will help you have more success in the kitchen. Sugar's natural form is crystallization. So when you're working with just pure sugar, it actually has a really strong desire to crystallize. So that can be mitigated in a couple different ways. One, you can omit like a tablespoon or so of sugar and add in invert sugar in its place. The invert sugar has a different molecular structure than sucrose does, and so it will interrupt that desire for sugar to recrystallize. And you can buy invert sugar. It's called Lyle's golden syrup, and you can make invert sugar, and I'll put a recipe on how to convert table syrup to invert sugar below. Once all of your ingredients are kind of moistened, the butter is melted, the sugar is you don't like a big blob of dry sugar in the pan. Like, you want to make sure everything is easy and fluid and liquid, and then stop stirring, especially once it's close to a boil. Once you stir boiling sugar, it will just turn into a hard crystallized glob. So be very careful with that. I'll generally swirl or I'll flip. Be careful if you're flipping. You need a little practice to do that. The last thing to pay attention to when you're working with sugar is reseeding, granulization. So when you're stirring sugar, there's little undissolved sugar crystals around the pan and often on the spoon that you've been stirring with. Those act as seed crystals. One of those crystals in your sugar can seed the entire thing and make it crystallize. So when you read recipes that say wipe down the pan with a pastry brush and some water, I use one of these silicone like barbecue brushes. I think they work great. The recipes say that for a reason, and it's so important. Now, if you don't have a brush, a cheater way to get around that, and what I often do, is when the sugar's coming up to temperature below about 170, 180 degrees, I'll put a lid on it for 3 or 4 minutes. What that does is it creates steam that condenses on the lid, and then it runs down and wipes off the side of the pan. But you want to be careful. Take like a small clean rag that has a little bit of water on it and just run around the rim of your pan and make sure that the spoon, if you put the spoon in to stir, that the spoon is not one that you stirred earlier that has unmelted sugar on it. So make sure you clean your spoon off too. Those 3 things will ensure success when you're making caramel, candies, any sort of sugar confection where your granulation is just not a desired result, which I think is all of them except for maybe rock candy. I wish all of you a very, very Merry Christmas. Today is the solstice, so happy Yule, happy solstice. The day before Christmas is the first night of Hanukkah, so happy Hanukkah to all of my Jewish friends, and thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and my love to you.